William sat in his car outside their home, staring at the warmly lit windows. From the outside, everything looked picture perfect: the neatly trimmed hedges, the glow of the kitchen lights, the faint silhouette of Lydia moving inside. Anyone else would see a happy, stable home, but William couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Lately, Lydia had been different. Not in a way he could immediately pinpoint, but there was a shift. She was distracted, always lost in thought, her phone screen lighting up in the middle of the night with messages she claimed were from work. Their conversations felt rehearsed, like she was carefully choosing her words rather than speaking freely, the way she used to. Even when they sat together, he could feel the distance between them stretching like an invisible chasm. Was it stress? Routine? A phase all marriages went through? He wanted to believe it was nothing, that the woman he had built a life with was still his. But deep in his gut, an unease stirred, whispering doubts he wasn't ready to face. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out of the car, forcing himself to shake off the feeling. Whatever it was, he would figure it out. William had always trusted Lydia. Their relationship had been built on years of love, shared struggles, and an unspoken understanding that they were a team. But lately, that trust felt like it was slipping through his fingers, replaced by a gnawing sense of uncertainty. It started with the late-night messages, her phone screen glowing in the dark while she quickly turned it over. Then there were the sudden schedule changes, the vague explanations about why she was getting home later than usual. She was distant, lost in thought even when they were together, smiling at him in a way that felt hollow. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Lydia laughed at something on her phone, a soft, knowing smile playing on her lips. William watched her closely, feeling an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. "Who's that?" he asked, trying to keep his voice light. Lydia barely glanced up. "Just Richard." He was sharing an old memory from college. Richard. The name landed heavily between them, but she didn't seem to notice. William forced a nod, but his mind raced. A harmless message, maybe, but something about the way her fingers lingered on the screen told him this wasn't nothing. William tried to push the thought away, convincing himself that he was being paranoid. Lydia and Richard had known each other for years, long before she and William had built a life together. But something about the way she mentioned him, the way her voice softened just slightly when she said his name, wouldn't leave him alone. One evening, after Lydia had gone to bed early, claiming she was exhausted, William sat alone in the dim light of their living room. His mind churned, replaying the little things he had ignored: the way she tucked her phone away whenever he entered the room, the distant look in her eyes when he spoke. With a deep breath, he reached for her phone, hesitating for a moment before pressing the power button. The screen lit up, revealing a notification, a message from Richard. "Can't stop thinking about earlier today. Wish we had more time." William's stomach twisted, his hands felt cold, his heart hammering against his ribs. He stared at the screen, feeling the weight of something breaking inside him. This wasn't just his imagination. This wasn't just harmless nostalgia between old friends. This was something else, something real, and it had already started. William sat in his truck outside the cafe, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Inside, through the rain-speckled window, he could see them, Lydia and Richard. They were seated across from each other, leaning in just a little too close. Lydia laughed at something Richard said, her head tilting back slightly, her fingers brushing against the rim of her coffee cup. William's stomach twisted. He told himself to leave, to drive away and pretend he hadn't seen this. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe it was just two old friends catching up. But deep down, he knew better. He knew Lydia's laugh, knew the way it sounded when she was trying to impress someone. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. She was doing it now. And Richard was watching her like she was the only person in the room. A part of William wanted to storm inside, to demand answers, but another part of him, the part that was exhausted from weeks of doubt, just sat there, paralyzed. The truth was unraveling right in front of him, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure he wanted to hear it. William's hands trembled as he set down the half-empty whiskey glass, the amber liquid swirling in slow, lazy circles. The house was silent, too silent. It used to be filled with warmth, with Lydia's soft humming in the kitchen, with laughter echoing down the hall. Now, all that remained was a suffocating emptiness, an unbearable quiet that settled into his bones. His mind replayed the conversation from earlier, over and over, each word slicing deeper. I love you, William, but I also love Richard. He had waited for the punchline, for some kind of twisted joke, but none came. Instead, Lydia had looked at him with those tear-filled eyes, pleading for him to understand something incomprehensible. She wanted both of them. A bitter laugh escaped his lips as he ran a hand through his hair. How had they gotten here? 20 years of marriage, of building a life together, only for her to stand there and tell him that wasn't enough. That he wasn't enough. The weight of it all pressed down on him, suffocating. He grabbed his keys. He couldn't stay here. Not tonight. Not in this house where every wall whispered of what they used to be. He needed air, needed to escape before he drowned in his own grief. The suitcase felt heavier than it should have as William zipped it shut. The sound slicing through the unbearable quiet of the bedroom. It wasn't just fabric and belongings packed inside, it was years of memories, of shared laughter, of promises that now felt hollow. He stood there for a moment, staring at the life he was leaving behind, a life he had once believed was unshakable. Lydia watched from the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself as though trying to hold together what was already breaking. You don't have to go, she whispered, her voice raw. William exhaled slowly, gripping the handle of his suitcase. I do, Lydia. He turned to face her, searching for something, remorse, second thoughts, anything that might make him stay. But all he saw was sorrow. Not regret, not the desperate need to fight for what they had. He let out a humorless laugh. You already made your choice. You just didn't expect me to make mine. She flinched at his words but said nothing. He rolled the suitcase toward the door, brushing past her without another glance. He wasn't just walking out of the house. He was walking away from the woman he had loved for 20 years. And for the first time, he wasn't sure if he'd ever look back. The weight of betrayal lingered long after William left. He had done everything right, been a devoted husband, a good father, a man who put his family first. And yet, here he was, standing in front of Richard's apartment, fists clenched at his sides, heart pounding with rage that burned deep in his chest. He had told himself he wouldn't do this, that Lydia wasn't worth the confrontation, that he should just walk away and never look back. But he couldn't, not without facing the man who had helped tear his life apart. When the door finally swung open, Richard's face tensed. He had expected this moment, yet he still looked unprepared. William. But William didn't wait. He stepped inside, the air thick with unspoken words and years of false friendship. You don't get to say my name like we're still friends. He bit out, his voice dangerously low. You don't get to act like this just happened. You chose this. Richard exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. I never wanted to hurt you. William let out a bitter laugh. Well, you did, and now you have to live with it. He didn't wait for a response. He walked out, leaving Richard alone with the wreckage he had caused. The night was quiet, too quiet. William sat alone in his motel room, staring at the blank television screen, the dim glow of the bedside lamp casting long shadows across the room. The bed felt foreign, the sheets stiff, and the space around him empty in a way that made his chest ache. It had been years since he had spent a night away from home. From the life he had built. From Lydia, but home didn't exist anymore, not in the way it used to. His phone sat on the nightstand, face down, as if turning it over would force him to face the reality he was running from. He hadn't spoken to Claire since he told her the truth. She had taken it with a quiet strength, her silence speaking volumes. He knew she needed time, but the thought of losing her, too, terrified him. A knock at the door shattered the stillness. His breath hitched. He wasn't expecting anyone. For a brief moment, he considered ignoring it, but curiosity got the best of him. When he opened the door, he froze. Lydia stood there, eyes red-rimmed, shoulders tense. William, she whispered, her voice barely audible. He exhaled slowly. What are you doing here? Lydia stood in the doorway, the weight of unspoken words pressing between them. Her face, once so familiar, looked like that of a stranger, now someone he had known in another life. William gripped the edge of the door, uncertain whether to let her in or walk away. The motel air smelled of stale coffee and regret, mirroring the hollowness in his chest. "I didn't know where else to go," she admitted, her voice fragile but steady. He studied her, searching for the woman he once loved. "You made your choice, Lydia," he said, the exhaustion thick in his tone. Tears welled in her eyes. "But she didn't break. I never wanted to lose you." He let out a hollow laugh, shaking his head. "Then why did you?" Silence, the kind that carried all the answers he didn't want to hear. Lydia took a step forward, hesitating before whispering, "I miss us." William's chest tightened. He wanted to miss them too. But what they had wasn't real anymore. It had been undone by her choices, by Richard, by everything she refused to see. He exhaled slowly. "Go home, Lydia." And for the first time, he shut the door. Months had passed, and William had learned that healing wasn't a straight path, it was a series of steps. Some forward, some backward, and some that felt like walking in place. The divorce was finalized, the house sold, and the last remnants of his old life neatly packed into boxes he never planned to open. He wasn't bitter anymore, just tired, but with that exhaustion came clarity. He had lost something. Yes, but he had also gained something in return. Freedom, a chance to start over. One evening, he found himself in a small bookstore downtown, flipping absent-mindedly through the pages of a novel he had no intention of buying. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "You like historical fiction?" He looked up, meeting the warm, curious gaze of a woman with a gentle smile. Evelyn. They had met once before. Briefly, through mutual friends, but back then, he had been too lost to notice. "I do," he admitted, surprised by how easily the words came. "Me too. Maybe you could give me some recommendations?" And just like that, a new chapter began, not rushed, not forced, but unfolding in its own quiet, unexpected way. Perhaps, after all, endings were just new beginnings in disguise. Life rarely follows the script we expect. Relationships change, people grow apart, and sometimes, the endings we fear the most are the ones that set us free. If there's one lesson to take away, it's that we can't control how others feel, but we can control how we respond. Healing takes time, and moving forward isn't about forgetting the past, it's about learning from it. Choose yourself when others won't. Know when to fight and when to let go. And most importantly, embrace the idea that every ending carries the seeds of a new beginning. You just have to be willing to nurture it.